They called me out around 7:42 a.m., a cold Tuesday morning in Columbus, Ohio. The kind of morning where your breath feels like smoke and the silence in the air isn't peaceful, it's loaded. Dispatch said it was likely a suicide, body found inside a locked trailer park behind a warehouse complex. Routine case, at least on paper. I'd worked hundreds like this over the years. And honestly, some deaths speak for themselves. But others, they whisper, and you have to lean in close to catch the lie. The trailer belonged to a man named Ronald Mercer, 42, part-time mechanic, divorced, no kids. The kind of guy neighbors said was quiet, kept himself. That phrase, kept himself, I've learned to treat like a siren. It's not always a red flag, but it means no one was really watching. And when no one's watching, bad things go unnoticed. When I arrived, the scene already smelled of fire. Not the active, aggressive scent of blaze, but the stale, acidic aftertaste it leaves behind. The trailer had been scorched from the inside. Fire department said it had burned fast and hot, mostly smoke and heat damage. Inside, we found Ronald's body on the floor between the tiny kitchenette and the collapsed futon. His skin was a patchwork of burns, but the position of the body told a different story. He wasn't curled in pain. He was flat, still, almost peaceful. The place was locked from the inside. Windows sealed tight, door bolted. No signs of forced entry. A space that wanted to keep the world out or keep a secret in. I knelt beside the body, scanning the surrounding area. On the counter, a glass of water, half full, a single cigarette in the ashtray, burnt to the filter. Here's what caught me off guard. The ashes in the tray were damp, clumped, like someone had spilled water over them. But the cigarette box next to it, dry as bone. I blinked and felt that first tug in my gut, the one that says, "Something's wrong here, Jack." The walls were covered in soot. But around the light switch, there was a faint handprint. Someone touched it after the fire started. And it wasn't Ronald's. His hands were too burned to leave such a distinct mark. Fire investigators said it was likely electrical. An old space heater overloaded, sparked a fire, and Ronald passed out from smoke inhalation. But the heater's wiring? It was intact. No melting, no shorting. Like someone had set the fire to look like a heater malfunction, but forgot the wires wouldn't support that story. I kept digging. Ronald's ex-wife, Maggie, hadn't spoken to him in months. But when I called, her voice froze the second I mentioned the trailer. "Did he say anything about the storage unit?" she asked. I paused. "What storage unit?" She hesitated. "He kept stuff there. After we split, I think someone was threatening him." I found the unit 2 hours later, under his name, but registered to a P.O. box in Westerville. Inside, a dusty metal shelf and an old laptop. When I powered it up, it loaded one single folder, letters to myself. There were 12 entries, each one a typed note, like diary confessions. Ronald talked about being followed, about someone asking questions at his job, about a man in a brown hoodie who kept showing up near his trailer but never knocked. And one entry stood out. "If anything happens to me, it won't be an accident, and it won't be suicide." He said I knew too much, but I don't even know what I know. Just that something about that accident at the plant doesn't add up. People are gone. Records deleted. I think they're cleaning up. I checked his employment history. 2 years ago, he worked at a manufacturing plant, Vexler Engineering, the same plant where a chemical leak killed 3 employees. OSHA blamed a pressure valve. Case closed. But Ronald had done maintenance on those same valves weeks before the accident. His notes hinted that the valve had been deliberately bypassed, and that he'd raised concerns to a supervisor, one who mysteriously retired a week later. It was becoming clear. Ronald had stumbled into something bigger than he understood. Back at the scene, I re-examined the door. The deadbolt was old but intact. No scratches. No signs of tampering. But above it, just barely visible, a faint smudge of grease, right where you grab if you were wearing gloves. Thick gloves, the kind a firefighter might wear. I pulled dispatch logs. The first 911 call about smoke had come in at 3:17 a.m. The fire unit arrived at 3:26. The fire was out by 3:31. But the call logs didn't list the names of the first responders. just a station number that hadn't been active in over a year. Someone showed up early. Someone who didn't want Ronald talking anymore. The body had no smoke in the lungs. None. That means he was already dead when the fire started. The coroner confirmed the cause. A single puncture wound under the rib cage, angled up. Clean. Precise. No blood spatter. Likely done with a thin blade. So here's the truth. Ronald Mercer was murdered. The killer entered before the fire. Knew Ronald. Knew how to get in. Killed him cleanly. Then rigged the fire to look accidental. Locked the trailer from inside using a hook and line trick I'd seen used by arsonists before. A thin wire to the mail slot to bolt the door from the inside. Then pulled back out and discarded. And the cigarette ashes? That was the killer's mistake. He'd poured water on them to erase fingerprints, but forgot that the dry box nearby would make it obvious. In the end, no arrests were made. The company had lawyers so thick you'd swear they bled ink. The plant accident stayed an unfortunate event. Ronald became a statistic, but I kept his last word with me. If anything happens to me, it won't be an accident. And he was right, because when you've seen as many crime scenes as I have, you learn something most people don't want to believe. Dead men still speak. You just have to know how to listen. They say kids see everything. What they don't say is, they don't always know what they're seeing. That's what made this one stick with me. Because by the time the adults realized what happened, the truth was already buried under backpacks, crayons, and a trail of red marker no one wanted to follow. It started on a Thursday morning at Kilburn Elementary, a small public school just outside Raleigh, North Carolina. The janitor, a man named Avery, unlocked room 2B just after 6 a.m., like always. But that day, he found something that didn't belong. On the whiteboard, written in shaky, uneven lines, were 6 words. He was here. He's not gone. Below that, in the corner of the board, someone had drawn a large, thick circle with a red marker. The marker was still uncapped, lying on the ground. At first glance, it looked like some kind of prank. Maybe a student snuck in. But then Will turned and saw the desk. The 4th one from the left front row. It had a single handprint on it, and what he swore looked like dried blood. The principal called it in as vandalism. Nothing major. But protocol required someone from the department to take a look, and I happened to be the one closest. I remember walking into that room. Bright walls, motivational posters, those little alphabet letters crawling across the top of the whiteboard. But there was something off, a kind of stillness, like the room itself had gone cold. Not temperature, atmosphere. Something was wrong, and whatever it wasn't in the air, it was in the silence. I examined the red circle first. It wasn't random. It had been drawn slowly, layered, a spiral, almost like someone tracing the same shape over and over until it bled through the board. When I touched it, the ink transferred to my glove like paint. It wasn't a marker. It was something thicker. I sent a swab to the lab. It came back 48 hours later. Typo negative. Human blood. Someone had used blood to write on that board, and no one had noticed until a janitor caught it by accident. Then came the twist. I started talking to the staff. Most didn't know anything, but the teacher assigned to room 2B, Emily Cartwright, was noticeably shaken. She'd been on leave for 2 weeks. When I asked why, she hesitated. Then she said, "It's because of Dylan." I said, "One of your students?" She nodded slowly. He's gone. They're calling it an accident. I dug into it. Dylan Parker, 8 years old. Quiet, bright, borderline gifted. 2 months earlier, he was found dead in a wooded lot behind his apartment complex. Blunt force trauma. Official ruling, accidental fall. No signs of foul play. But here's the problem. The boy didn't fall. He was found with circular bruising on both shoulders, like he'd been grabbed and held. His shoes were clean, and there was a fresh red marker in his backpack. His parents said he'd started acting strange in the weeks before, drawing spirals in his notebooks. refusing to sit in his desk, saying, "He watches me when you're not here," that he was never named. I checked school security footage. Nothing at first. But 3 days before Dylan's death, there was a glitch in the hallway camera feed outside room 2B. A 3-minute blackout. When the footage resumed, the classroom door, which had been closed, was wide open. No one had entered. No one had exited. No teachers were nearby. No students on record were scheduled to be in the building. And yet, when we enhanced the audio, just barely, under the white noise, you could hear the sound of breathing. I returned to the classroom the next night, alone. Sometimes, you find more truth in a place once it's empty. I was walking past Dylan's desk when I noticed something under the chair leg, a folded sheet of paper, wedged so tightly I had to use a blade to get it loose. It was a drawing, a man, all in black, no face, just a red circle where his head should be, and in the corner, written in a child's scrawl, "He stand where the light dies." That phrase sat in my mind like a brick. The janitor Will told me he sometimes saw lights flicker when he passed room 2B. Not in the hallway, just that room. The building's wiring was old, sure, but only room 2B? The odds didn't sit right. Then came the part that never made the reports. We reviewed teacher login records. On the morning Dylan was found, someone had logged into the school's teacher portal from room 2B at 4:12 a.m. The credentials used? Emily Cartwright's. But she was at home. She had login records on her personal laptop to prove it. Someone or something used her identity to access the network from inside the classroom where Dylan once sat. Here's the detail that tied it together. The circle, that spiral on the board, I found the exact same shape on Dylan's notebook, but it was pressed into the paper from behind, like someone had drawn it underneath and it left a mark. Forensics confirmed it matched the pressure and width of a glass jar, the same kind used to store formalin, the chemical used in preserving lab samples. I asked around. The school had phased out its old science room years ago, but when I checked the old records, I found one final inventory sheet, listing a sealed jar missing from its shelf. Inside it, supposedly, had been a preserved heart. It was never recovered. The final thread unraveled when a counselor admitted something off the record. Dylan had mentioned a man in the closet during the session, said he didn't talk, didn't move, just pointed at the board, at the red circle. That was the last day Dylan went to class. There were no arrests, no suspects. The school eventually painted over room 2B and turned it into a supply room. But every now and then, I still get calls from the school district, reports of teachers hearing breathing in the hallway, of kids refusing to go near certain desks, of faint red stains reappearing on the board, even after it's been wiped clean. But the system moves on. Dylan's case remains closed. Officially, he died alone, tragically, behind an apartment building on a cloudy afternoon. But I know better. And somewhere in a quiet storage room once known as room 2B, I swear to you, the red circle is still there, faint, patient, waiting for someone to look again. There are cases that linger, not because they're gruesome or complicated or even tragic, but because something about them just doesn't sit right. Something subtle, off, like a song that skipped one beat too early. This was one of those. It was 2016, late fall, when I was called to a quiet, suburban neighborhood outside Cincinnati, Ohio. Tree-lined streets, white picket fences, the kind of place where kids ride scooters and neighbors wave at each other every morning. But that morning, one of those neighbors made a 911 call. She claimed it was a child, a small boy, standing in the middle of her street, barefoot and still. She said he wouldn't speak, wouldn't move. He just stood there, staring at her, holding what looked like a piece of cloth. By the time officers arrived 4 minutes later, the boy was gone. Now, in most cases, you'd chalk this up to a wandering child, maybe someone playing a prank. But here's where things got strange. The woman, Lydia Carson, said she'd seen the boy before. Not that morning, a year earlier. She swore it was the same kid. Same hair, same pajamas, same blank stare. But that made no sense, because a year ago, she wasn't even living on that street. She just moved in 2 months prior. When I asked how that was possible, she paused and said, "I remember the eyes. I remember seeing them somewhere else." Then she said something that stuck with me. He looked like a memory I didn't make. The department considered it a false alarm. I didn't. I pulled security footage from homes along the street. Nothing. No sign of a boy. But when I scrubbed frame by frame through one camera's infrared backup, something flickered. One frame. A blurred silhouette. Small. Child-size. Just standing on the curb. In his hand. A piece of dark cloth. And then gone. No footsteps. No motion blur. No exit. I started canvassing the neighborhood. That's when I met Donna Hayes, an older woman who'd been living on the block for nearly 3 decades. She said something odd. "You're not the first to ask about a boy who doesn't belong." I asked what she meant. She told me about a family that had lived there in the early 90s. The Tanners. They had a 5-year-old son named Eli who went missing one night. Vanished from his bedroom. Window locked. No forced entry. Just gone. They never found him. What caught my attention was her next sentence. The night Eli disappeared, there was a piece of black cloth on his bed, like someone had dropped it there. I tracked down the Tanner case file. It was thin, no suspects, no leads, but there was one detail that hadn't been followed up. A neighbor at the time, George Milner, now deceased, had reported seeing a small shape moving in his backyard the night Eli vanished. He said it looked like a shadow walking upright. No one followed up. They assumed it was an animal. But here's the part that hit me sideways. Eli had been wearing red flannel pajamas when he vanished. And in the 911 call Lydia Carson made just days ago, she specifically described the boy as wearing red flannel pajamas. The exact pattern was never released to the public. This wasn't just a wandering kid. It was Eli, or something that looked like him. I dug deeper. Lydia's house was built in 2003. Before that, the plot had been empty since the fire in the early 90s, the same year Eli vanished. The fire destroyed an old shed owned by the Milners, the same George Milner who saw the shadow. I filed for access to archive property reports. Inside the fire inspection notes, there was mention of a sealed root cellar beneath the shed, never excavated. No follow-up. The land was bulldozed, paved, and forgotten. I brought in a team with ground-penetrating radar. It wasn't easy to get the permit, but I pushed. Something wasn't right. What we found was a narrow concrete chamber, 4 feet high, 8 feet long. Inside were broken planks, a decayed children's blanket, and a scrap of fabric. Black, almost like velvet, still intact after all these years. We also found a small handprint, fused into the dried earth, like whoever had pressed it had done so with force or fear. DNA results were inconclusive, too degraded, but based on size and spacing, the print was from a child no older than 6. There were no bones, no remains, no signs of death, just absence. That's the part that kept me up. Because if Eli died there, where's his body? And if he didn't, then where did he go? Here's what sealed it. 3 days after we unearthed the root cellar, I got a call from Donna Hayes. She was shaking. Said she woke up at 3 a.m. to the sound of footsteps on her porch. When she checked her security feed, there was nothing. But when she opened her front door the next morning, something was there on the mat. A folded piece of black cloth, damp from the rain. No footprints. No fingerprints. Just a thin outline on the cloth the size of a child's hand. To this day, I can't explain what happened. There's no logical sequence, no suspect to arrest, just a boy who disappeared from a locked room, and a figure that keeps reappearing in the memories of people who should have never known him. Sometimes, a case doesn't leave you because it's unsolved. Sometimes, it doesn't leave you because you were never meant to solve it. And every so often, late at night, I'll think about that street. The red flannel pajamas, the black cloth, The cold, unmoving eyes of a child who wasn't there until he was. And I wonder, was he ever really gone? Some crime scene scream at you. Blood on the carpet. Signs of forced entry. Shattered glass. They tell a story before you even ask the first question. But then there are scenes like this one. Quiet, still, and far too perfect. And those are the ones that stay with you. This case took me to Billings, Montana, winter of 2013. The call came in from a real estate agent named Miranda Talbot, who was preparing to show a property that had just gone on the market. A 2-story colonial home on the edge of town. Nothing special. 3 bedrooms, fenced backyard, a finished basement. The kind of place families buy to chase stability. Miranda had shown the house a few times over the previous weeks. But on this particular day, something unnerved her. She said it smelled different. Not bad, just sterile. The air felt heavy, like a hospital room. And more than that, the place was immaculate. No dust, no fingerprints, no stray threads on the carpet. Not even a fingerprint on the doorknobs. She hadn't cleaned it. The cellar hadn't either. But somehow, the house looked like it had been reset. Like every trace of human presence had been erased. She shrugged it off. But that evening, she came back to lock up and noticed something odd. A faint reddish stain in the grout line by the refrigerator. Small, barely visible. She reached down and touched it. Sticky. She didn't report it to the police. Not yet. The next morning, when she returned to the house to clean the spot, it was gone. Not faded. Gone. The tile looked brand new. And that's when she called us. Now, I've walked into a lot of homes. I know what lived in feels like. And this place, it felt vacuumed of life. Not just clean. Scrubbed of history. There was something else. In the upstairs master bedroom, the bed was made perfectly. Hospital corners. Not a wrinkle on the duvet. But beneath the pillow, I found something tucked away. A single latex glove. Rolled tight. Clean. No powder. No prints. A glove like that doesn't end up there by accident. The current owner, a woman named Denise Morrow, was out of state. She'd moved to Arizona 6 months ago after her husband passed away. She swore she hadn't been inside the house since the move. No renters, no visitors. The property was listed through a local agent. I pulled the original case file on her husband, Thomas Morrow. The official report said natural causes. Heart attack. He died in the basement, alone. Paramedics found him lying near the laundry unit. Denise was out of town at the time, but the photos from the original scene didn't sit right with me. Thomas's shirt was bloodied. He had facial bruising. No trauma that would suggest foul play, but the lividity pattern was off. It looked like he'd been moved after death. Still, no signs of struggle. No weapon. Case closed. But here's where things turned. I requested access to the home's smart devices, cameras, thermostats, anything with logs. Most have been offline since Denise left. But the refrigerator? That unit kept activity logs. And in the week prior to Miranda's discovery, the fridge had been opened and closed 36 times. Problem was, the house had supposedly been empty. Worse still, those entries occur between 2 and 4 a.m. every night like clockwork. I placed a covert sensor inside the home and waited. For 3 nights, nothing. On the 4th night, at exactly 2:12 a.m., the motion sensors triggered. Then again at 3:01. Then again at 3:37. We deployed a team. The house was locked. No signs of entry. But the sensors weren't lying. Movement had occurred. And once again, the kitchen grout looked freshly clean, bleached, no trace of residue. I asked myself the obvious. Who's cleaning a dead man's kitchen in the middle of the night? We installed hidden cameras. That night, we watched. What we saw made my skin crawl. At 2:08 a.m., the lights in the kitchen flickered on. A tall figure entered, dressed head to toe in what looked like surgical scrubs. Gloves. Cap mask. No visible skin. They moved with purpose. Not frantic. Not sloppy. Calm. Controlled. The figure pulled open drawers, examined surfaces, wiped down counters with industrial precision. Not a speck of dirt was left. Then they moved to the basement. That's when I knew something was wrong. Because as the figure knelt by the laundry unit, the same spot Thomas Morrow died, they reached beneath the machine and pulled out a folded cloth soaked in blood. They studied it for a few seconds, then dropped it into a biohazard bag and disappeared out of frame. By the time we breached the house 5 minutes later, there was no one inside, no sign of forced entry, no blood, no bag, but on the kitchen counter, a single glove, same as the one from the bedroom. We dusted the entire house again. No fingerprints, no fibers, no prints on the glove either. I checked local supply shops, hospitals, anything that could have sourced the gear used in the video. Nothing matched. No sales, no stolen shipments, no missing uniforms. And then the call came from the lab. The blood on the cloth? It wasn't Thomas Morrow's. It belonged to a woman named Celia Gant, missing since 2004. I pulled her file. She disappeared while working as a home cleaner. Last seen entering a house in Billings. Not the same house, but just 2 blocks away. The house was owned by a man named Michael Harrow. He died in 2005. Cause of death? Cardiac arrest. Found in the basement. I compared photos of that case to the Morrow's home. Identical layout. Same builder. Same interior design. I went back and reviewed footage from our surveillance setup. At the exact moment the figure entered the kitchen on the second night, a cleaning bottle on the shelf turned slightly by itself, not from vibration, not from air movement. It pivoted like it had been used. I don't know who or what is erasing the past inside that house, but I know this. The blood of a woman missing for over a decade showed up in a home where no one had lived for months. Cleaned, scrubbed, and sealed behind walls of silence. And something, is trying to make sure the truth never sees the light of day. Because some homes don't want to be sold. Some homes just want to be sterile. And sometimes the cleanest places hide the dirtiest secrets. You get used to silence in my line of work. It becomes a part of the job, the kind of silence that settles in after you step into a room where something terrible happened. But there was one scene where the silence didn't just settle. It pressed in, thick, intentional, as if it had a reason. The call came in from a probate lawyer in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. A man named Eldon Pritchard had passed away, natural causes. He was 83, lived alone, no kids. No recent contact with anyone. His house was a relic from the 60s, full of antique furniture, heavy curtains, and that sour smell of sealed rooms and unopened mail. Nothing about it screamed foul play, except this. When the executor entered to assess the estate, they found a cassette recorder sitting on the dining room table. Next to it was a single sticky note with just 3 words written in jagged handwriting. Play this last. The lawyer played it. Nothing but static. But here's the part that got my attention. 2 weeks later, when a cleaning crew went in, they found a second recorder hidden in the crawl space beneath the floorboards of the bedroom. Same brand, same tape, but this one had audio. Muffled, fragmented, a man's voice breathing heavily. And then 7 words. She was never supposed to be there. The crew called the police. The police called me. By the time I got to the house, both recorders were already in evidence. I spent the first hour just walking the perimeter. The place felt sealed like a tomb. The curtains were all drawn. The windows covered in a thin layer of dust, undisturbed. Yet the air inside was clean, recently circulated. I found an air purifier running the master bedroom. Strange for a man who, according to the file, had no history of respiratory illness. In the basement, I found something else, a wall safe built into the concrete. It had been opened already by the estate lawyer. Inside, they found old cash, a handgun, and a manila envelope labeled simply, 1979, the incident. The envelope contained 6 Polaroids. Grainy, overexposed. They showed what looked like a hotel room, floral wallpaper, a bed with red-stained sheets. In one of the images, a woman's hand, lifeless, hung off the edge of the mattress. In another, a reflection in the mirror, Eldon, younger, holding a camera. No body was ever reported found in 1979. No missing person matched the photos. No record of Eldon traveling that year. I had a forensic analyst scan the photos. The wallpaper matched a motel in Des Moines that burned down in 1985. The fire started in room 14, the room Eldon had stayed in. The official cause? Electrical fault. But one of the firefighters had noted in his report, never followed up, the distinct smell of accelerant. I dug into Eldon's past. He'd worked as a radio technician during the Cold War. Paranoia was practically in his DNA. His house had layers of insulation not for warmth, but for soundproofing. The crawl space where the second recorder was found, it was reinforced, not with steel, with lead-line foam to block electromagnetic signals. This wasn't some forgetful old man. This was someone trying not to be heard. I asked the techs to examine the second recorder again. What they found chilled me. There were two distinct audio signatures on the tape. One was Eldon's voice, consistent, slow, recorded over time, but layered beneath it, buried almost too low to hear, was another voice, a female voice, whispering. We isolated the track, cleaned it up. The words were broken, gasping, but we could make out fragments. Please, don't leave me here. It wasn't supposed to happen. I told him to stop. And then silence. No identity. No match. No trace. The recorder hadn't just captured Eldon's confession. It captured the last sounds of a woman who had been forgotten by every system meant to protect her. I went back to the house one last time. Alone. No warrant. No team. Just me and a hunch. In the attic, beneath loose insulation, I found a suitcase. Inside, a woman's coat, purse, a broken necklace, and motel room key label 14. But no name, no ID, just a photo. A snapshot of her sitting at a cafe table, smiling. And behind her, barely in frame, Eldon, watching. I'll never know who she was. Eldon took that with him. And the system, as it always does, let it happen because it was 1979, because she wasn't reported missing, because no one followed up on a motel fire that smelled too much like gasoline. Some crime scenes tell you what happened. Others, they dare you to figure out. Eldon never answered for what he did. He built a fortress of silence around his guilt. But sometimes the dead slip. Sometimes, even in death, they leave behind a crack in the wall. And if you listen closely, past the static, past the noise, you can hear the truth whispering back. Not loud, but enough. Enough for someone like me to follow it.